Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. It's your boy Brandon, and I hope everyone is doing phenomenal as always. And thank you as always to everyone who keeps subscribing, liking, and following this journey with us. And yes, we are on the road to 2K, people, so keep helping us get there. But more importantly, we got a very, very, very interesting topic, as you can tell by the title and thumbnail. This one is called Mama is the Monster, alright? And this is basically based off of the fact that the episode we get from Season 1, Chapter 6, is called The Monster. And the reason why I decided to start analyzing Mama's character associated with this monster is very interesting because in my opinion, we have been forever led on this rabbit hole of why Mama's incorporated into this episode specifically. That is just my opinion, but I've always wondered why, okay? Why we're introduced to Mama during this episode, but then we kind of get led on this journey involving the term the monster and all of these other different scenarios, specifically involving 11 and what she kind of believes herself to be, and then we end up seeing her save Mike, and then we get this whole story about how she touched the Demogorgon while she's in the void, and apparently that resulted in her creating the gate, and that's when she calls herself the monster. But throughout that episode, there's a lot of other things that kind of distract us from one specific thing that ends up happening in this episode, which is when Hopper and Joyce go to meet Mama. So as I was thinking about this, I'm like, why would she just be incorporated in this episode? We don't see her again for a whole entire season, but this episode is titled The Monster, and this is a brand new character all of a sudden we're being introduced to that apparently is the mother of this main character that Hopper and Joyce do not even know is real yet at this point in time in the season, so just keep that in mind. But as we know, Hopper was investigating in episode 3, Holly Jolly, okay, he was at the library with Powell, and they were investigating these articles involving Terry Ives and Hawkins' lab. So, as we've been led up to this point in this show, we have gotten this vibe that Hawkins' lab is the bad guy, and we've gotten this vibe that Papa, Dr. Brenner, is the bad guy. And then all of a sudden we get this story about this woman whose daughter went missing, and she's been trying to find all of this, okay? Find this girl, alright? And obviously that is our girl Mama being Terry Ives. So the story we've gotten leading up to this point is that we should feel bad for this character, and that something bad happened to this character, and that everyone else is involved. So, as we get into this one, you got to keep your mindset a little bit open in this sense, okay? Because this is going to get really confusing. It was hard for me to even start filming this and on where to start correctly. But real quickly, as we have analyzed Aunt Becky, okay, we have a whole theory called the Becky Ives theory, all right? We analyze that character in every scene that we see her and everything she says. And if you have seen that theory, you would know that the vibe I got from Aunt Becky is that she's extremely sus, and there's some weird stuff going on about that character, like why she knows supposedly certain things and all of this shit. But also, when we first meet her, why she kind of just leads Hopper and Joyce into kind of a loop of like bullshit necessarily. But as I was reanalyzing Mama's character in a different sense, okay, and incorporating Aunt Becky into this, I started getting the vibe that maybe Becky just does not believe in bullshit. And what do I mean by that? I know that's extremely confusing, but as I've reanalyzed Becky slightly throughout this scenario, okay, I've started to realize that what we hear from Becky is that this is what she just believes. And if we don't look at her like, oh, she's lying to Hopper and Joyce and all of this shit, okay, and that this is just what she believes, but she kind of just laughs about it the whole time. She kind of makes a mockery of what Terry Ives has gone through and what she has dealt with. And then she ends up making a lot of claims when she starts talking about this, involving stuff kind of talking about the Nina Project, but she refers to it as MK Ultra. But how she describes it is that they would put them in bathtubs naked in isolation tanks, and basically a see nothing, hear nothing type of experience, so that they could expand the boundaries of the mind and all that shit. But as she's explaining this, okay, she's kind of, like I said, making a mockery because she just believes this to be bullshit. She does not believe this is true. And then when they start talking about Jane, okay, the missing baby in the scenario, before we ever realize that this could be 11, basically she looks at him and she goes that Terry didn't know she was pregnant, okay, which is a little odd from what we see in Mama's flashback. And then she also basically says that you guys don't understand that basically she miscarried in the 3rd trimester. So that, in a sense, even as viewers, we get led on this loop that something's not right involving Becky Ives. But what if we were seeing this wrong and that something might not be right involving our character of Mama? And this information, if you truly think about it, anything that she might know about this involving or anything she has heard would be from Mama's mouth necessarily. And this would have had to have been before Mama got messed up like we see in her flashback, okay? But as we even get into the scene when they go, she shows them the bedroom, okay? She's kind of talking more about it and she kind of gives us some answers that we end up finding out to be factual, involving the fact that the bad men at Hawkins' lab wanted to use these children as weapons to fighting commies, okay? That's somewhat factual, but not necessarily. We technically do not know that that's what they wanted to do, even still up until this point. We somewhat see that, but we see later on that Brenner and 11 during the Nina Project, they were attempting all of this stuff on how to stop something. So like I said, this is extremely confusing, so just bear with me. But even in this scenario, okay, as they're asking questions and Joyce basically says, well, do you think it's even possible? Because when Joyce says that, that basically hints at the fact that Joyce now believes, okay, this woman just does not believe any of this to be true. She believes that this is bullshit and she does not believe in bullshit. So basically during the scenario, she kind of laughs at them, all right, and she basically says it's all make-believe, and then she basically tells Joyce right after that that there's nothing from the hospital, there's no birth certificate, and that all the doctors and nurses confirmed she miscarried. So then our boy Hopper jumps in, and that's when he says the line, oh, well, they could have covered that up, right? And then we end up leaving this home, and we don't get any more information, and we end up finding out that Becky was no help, and she even apologizes about that. But if we really think about this deeply, people, that Becky just doesn't believe this shit. She logically, as a human being, okay, any of us, if we did not believe in something and a cop came to us trying to get answers about some shit, we would not logically want to lead them in the wrong direction, okay? If we did not believe this to be true, we would not want to be involved with a crime that we truly believe that we have no involvement with, and that whatever story that they're trying to connect here with is not factual. If we didn't believe it to be factual, people, we logically would not want to lead the police specifically in the wrong direction, now getting ourselves involved as lying and all of this shit. But now that we have this little briefing about Becky, that we're kind of regrouped about our thoughts about Becky, okay, that if she just truly does not believe in bullshit, and that's why we kind of see her in this. She's the one that tells us this story of Mama in season 1. So logically, people, for getting the story from someone who doesn't believe in it, okay, we're not getting maybe all of the truth. So as we get into season 2, when we finally see 11 find Mama and meet Mama and believe that this is her mother, we start to get more of a vibe that something is not right, okay? And I'm going to tell you, as I reanalyze this, it blew my fucking mind. Because right before we see 11 go to Mama's, okay, this is after the whole Hopper and 11 fight, and 11's alone, and she's cleaning the cabin. We've talked about this and a lot of other theories. But what does she do, people? She finds the articles. She finds the articles about Terry Ives. She starts believing that this is her mother. And then all of a sudden, 11 looks at the TV and realizes the TV is broken. And then what does she do? She grabs a radio and she puts her blindfold on and she tries to connect and find Mama. And as we see 11 do this, she ends up being capable of doing this, and she ends up finding Mama inside of the void, all right, and she locates where Mama's at. And then what do we see, people? All of a sudden, 11 walks up to Mama, all right, and she walks up to her and she says Mama, and that's whole scenario, and she looks up to her and she says Jane, and they grab hands, but then Mama disappears. So if we think logically about this, all right, Mama, for some reason, who we end up later seeing that she is capable of going inside of this void herself, it raises a lot of suspicion as to why Mama would not just stay in this mindset and talk to her daughter, correct? Why would she just not stay there, and why would she disappear? So if we think about that, maybe there's a bigger reason to that, as maybe she wanted 11 to come to her. And based off the title of the series, yes, I don't think that is a good thing, okay? So let's just keep going. It's going to get very interesting. Because as we jump, all right, and we see 11 go to Mama's house, who's the first person we meet once again? We get to the door, she's banging on the door, and who comes to the door? Our Aunt Becky, who seems very, very sus. But as I just said, okay, if Becky does not believe in bullshit and she's like that type of character that we get, no doubt in my mind, the very first line, which we have talked about in other theories as well, but the very first line she basically says to 11 is, I ain't buying your Thin Mints, kid, and 11 doesn't know what that means, because right after that, she basically looks at 11, she goes, whatever you're selling, I ain't buying. And if you really, really think about that, people, that is kind of a play on words referring to bullshit. More specifically in the upside down matter is, I ain't buying whatever you're selling, I ain't buying your bullshit, right? So, no doubt in my mind, I caught something involving all of that, and that's why I started thinking this about Becky a little bit deeper, is that if Becky just does not believe in bullshit, she doesn't believe in any of this, and that's who gave us this story in season 1. But as we see the scene continue, okay, what happens, people? Becky's bullshit disbelief, okay, kind of changes here. Because as we know, the famous scene where 11 opens the door, she opens it, Becky looks scared as shit, and then all of a sudden 11 looks at her and says, I want to talk to Mama. And if we really deeply think about this, people, the whole first time we saw Mama and Becky Ives, more specifically being Becky Ives, we hear that she does not believe in this child, that she truly does not believe this child to be born. So if you think about this deeper, that not only did the unlocking the door freak her out, but that phrase probably also freaked her out quite a lot, because that's something she did not believe in whatsoever, that this baby was even real. And now all of a sudden she's got this child saying, I want to talk to my mom. So this is when things get interesting, and we would have never seen this before, because all we got, like I said, is this bullshit story or bullshit disbelief from this character in season 1. But as we walk in, okay, and as 11 walks in, we'll look at Aunt Becky. Like I've analyzed before, Aunt Becky looks scared as shit. But as I analyzed this, that Aunt Becky was probably scared because of 11. But what if she was not? What if she's scared of the other character involved in this scenario being Mama, alright? Because as we see 11 walk in, all right, we basically see her just walk up to Mama, and she goes, Mama, it's Jane, and she grabs her hand, okay? So she says it's Jane, and then she grabs her hand. Kind of like we saw in that void moment previous to this when 11 was in the cabin, correct? And what kind of made Mama just disappear for some reason. And now that we're thinking of this, that maybe that was Mama leading 11 to her. And like I said earlier, not a good way, all right? But as we keep going, okay, she grabs her hand and then she goes, I'm here now. And what does Mama do? She turns and looks while she is in the void, mind you. And we know that because she is doing her repeat scenario. But as she turns, she kind of turns and looks right past 11, if you think about it. And who is standing right behind her, people? She's staring at Becky, possibly. So if Mama is really not even looking at 11, and while she's in this void, okay, and then all of a sudden she looks past her at the person who is scared shitless, could this woman have been scared before in the past involving weird powers or whatever, random shit happening, and not obviously involved with 11, but involving Mama? And trust me, there's a reason for that, okay? Because as this conversation continues, we see 11 look around. She goes, what's wrong with Mama? And as we analyzed before, we thought that this is why Becky was scared. But after she does that, she kind of just looks extremely sad after 11 kind of turns. She looks scared but sad now. But as we continue, people, we get to that table conversation where 11 and Aunt Becky are in the kitchen, okay? 11 is lost like we've analyzed, and she's lost looking at Mama. And more specifically because she wants kind of answers about what's going on. And we see that that's how this kind of conversation kind of continues. But we also see this conversation continue in the sense of that's what Aunt Becky is also doing. doing. She's trying to get answers about who this girl could be, if this is the actual girl. She's trying to figure out where she came from, and then 11 kind of just is out of it, and she's asking what's wrong with her and all of this. And basically, Aunt Becky's, that's when she says the creepy line that she's in a dream, a long dream. And 11 all of a sudden asks, oh, is it a good dream? And Becky gets real emotional. She goes, I really hope so. And then all of a sudden, this is when things turn. And even when we analyze the Becky Ives theory, okay, it was hard to analyze this because it's like back and forth with this woman. Sometimes she comes off like she's being nice and not sus, and then other times she comes off being sus. Because she says this dream line all creepy, and then all of a sudden, okay, she's asking her, and then all of a sudden she looks at 11. She goes, she always believed you were out there. And more specifically, that she always believed that you would come home, okay? So that's a tell right there, and you probably are very confused, but pay attention to the word home. Because as we just analyzed, all right, what happened? All right, 11 walks in, she says, hey, it's Jane. She grabs her hand, and she says, I'm here now, in a sense that, kind of like I'm home now, right? So logically, this is now the second mention that this is possibly 11's home, according to 11 thinking that this is her mom, and now according to Becky, but maybe believing that this is the girl. Because 11 and her have this moment where 11's like home, and then she looks at her and she goes, yes, home, as in this is your home now. But as we keep going, people, this is when 11 gets shown that bedroom, okay? And this is where it gets very, very, very interesting and a little bit creepy if you think about it. Because as they're walking into this room, okay, they're talking, and Aunt Becky is still trying to get answers. And as we analyzed, it's a little sus, but if you really think about this logically, this woman has this random girl in her house that all of a sudden opened her door with powers, thinks this woman, who apparently is her sister, is now her mother, and basically her whole entire world of disbelief bullshit has changed, people, correct? So, logically, she's still trying to get answers, but what does she say once again? She basically tells her that you can stay here with me. And what does that mean, people? She's basically telling her that this is her home, okay? So now, this is now the third time we have a mention that this is 11's home and that she's being included in this household and all of this. But what gets very interesting is as 11 starts touching these items and touches the teddy bear and turns around and kind of agrees to Aunt Becky that she will talk to her about things, what ends up happening, people? We see the lights start blinking and 11 gets led down the hallway, right? Well, as we know and as we see here, okay, that 11 kind of knows what this means, as we learn in this show and all throughout this show, is that when 11 is in the void, okay, what is she kind of doing, all right? Not necessarily involved with lights, but what is she kind of doing, people? She kind of goes into the void to what? To spy on people, in a sense. And as we know, people, the next episode in this season, after we are getting this scene, the next episode is called The Spy, all right? And that is also chapter 6 of season 2, which chapter 6 of season 1 was also The Monster. So, no doubt in my mind, there's some big connections here, but as we see this happen, okay, if you really think about it, we see 11 in the void a lot of the time. And what is 11 doing most of the time? 11 is sitting there with the blindfold on, right? Not moving around, not walking around. She's logically just sitting there in her mindset, and she is capable of walking around, okay? She's capable of looking for people and walking around and doing all of this shit and basically becoming an explorer in a sense. So, if we think about this logically, the fact that these lights are blinking all of a sudden with these two sitting in this room talking about 11 being home now, and basically Becky saying, yeah, you can stay here with me until we figure this out, yeah, stay here with us. So logically, Becky is just kind of trying to help her if we rethink our thoughts about this woman, but then all of a sudden we see these lights blink like she's being led somewhere, and only 11 understands this. Because Aunt Becky even says, and this is a line that I've connected before that also connects to the story of the Creoles. Because basically as Aunt Becky starts talking to 11, she's kind of talking to her about this and talking about the lights, and she's like, oh, that happens all the time. And you can see that 11 knows what is going on here, that she does not believe that. She she's not even listening. And then all of a sudden, Aunt Becky looks at her like very odd, like, well, how does this girl, like, why is this girl following these lights? And she's like very interested in this, okay? Because all of a sudden, Aunt Becky says that her Aunt Shirley, her crazy Aunt Shirley, always believed this house to be haunted. Well, in season 4, people, obviously we get a brand new house, basically that looks like a haunted house, correct? And what do we find out throughout that whole story, all right? That because of this relocation, in a sense, more specifically the Creoles relocating to Hawkins in this house, okay, the reason they moved to this house is why, people? Because Virginia's great uncle had left it to them. So we kind of have connections here involving a haunted house, okay, involving weird, mysterious shit going on in a house, and also with how these people required these homes. They required them through family, more specifically an aunt and an uncle, which is very odd. But other than that, okay, other than that Creel House connection in a sense, all right, I'm not getting involved with that. This is not about Mama being Alice, and trust me, if you've seen my other theories, I will forever believe that until someone tells me it's not true, and in the show, it doesn't show that. But more specifically, okay, other than that, 11 is following this because she knows that this is what happens when you possibly walk around in the void, correct? Well, what gets very eerie and creepy to me is that as 11 sees Mama and we see that the light blinks right by Mama, okay, all of a sudden 11 walks in, she sees the blood on Mama's nose, okay, and then kind of what happens, all right? She basically says out loud that Mama knows I'm here, okay? So we know that she physically knows that she's here, all right? But if we think about this a little deeply and a little creepily, okay, Mama kind of knows she's here in this void mindset that she's trying to pull her into right now. So there's a lot of questions here, all right? But as we see this and as basically 11 gets more of a confirmation that Mama knows she's here, all of a sudden our Aunt Becky gets scared to shit, basically like she just saw a ghost, correct? And then all of a sudden that TV channel starts changing to what, people? To static. And that is the thing, people. Like I said earlier, okay, I mentioned that whole cabin scenario when 11 finds Mama, right? And what does she do? She does not use the television because it was broken. However, in this scene, in order for Mama to try and get 11 to understand that she wants to talk, which we find out right after that Mama wants to talk, how does Mama, in a sense, say lure 11 to believing that Mama wants to talk, okay? She starts changing the television set. And that, people, is how we know 11 communicates and does her little spy stuff, at least involving Mike, right? She takes the television into her room, puts her blindfold on, and that's what we start seeing her do in season 2. So the question is how does Mama know that 11 uses a television to do this shit? If you're starting to catch my drift about this, it gets a little bit eerie here, okay? Because as we just saw all of this lights shit going on, all right? We basically see 11, okay, having this conversation in a completely other room away from Mama, but then all of a sudden these lights start going and it leads her right all the way back downstairs, right to Mama, and to where she understands that Mama wants to talk. But this is where it gets interesting, people, okay? Because as we see this, all right, and as 11 finally goes into this void to find Mama and talk, we kind of get the same scenario as when 11 first saw Mama, all right? While she was in the cabin, she sees her in the same scenario, in a sense. Except in that cabin scenario, she walks from behind her, okay? So that might be something as well. But in this scenario, what do we see, people? We see a woman in the void just sitting in her chair the same way we just saw her, okay? And logically, people, as I discussed, when we see 11 in the void all throughout this show, okay, 11 can be sitting there, but she can also be in her mindset walking around freely. So the question is why is Mama just all of a sudden stuck up in a chair, okay, when she's in a mindset and should be able to walk around freely? Just because her physical body is kind of not working correctly and where she might not be able to walk on her own or do all of this shit, that logically does not mean that this woman is stuck in a chair the same way that while she's in this void. She does not need to be. That's kind of what I mean. Logically, she should be able to walk around freely however she wants because this is her mindset. But what's interesting here, all right, this is not fully her mindset yet, and that could be a reason why. Or, like I said, she's been kind of being lured into here, more specifically 11. 11 has been kind of being led into this at this point, all right? And led into what? And I'm just going to say it, somewhat of a trap. Which we find out a lot throughout this season that the spy specifically leads us into a trap, okay? So, with that being said, okay, as this happens, alright, we see a repeat scene, okay, except there's one thing that's left out. As we see this happen, okay, 11 walks in and she just basically says, she goes, "Mama, it's me, it's Jane." But then we don't see a hand grab, okay? 11 does not grab her hand in this scenario, alright? And then all of a sudden, we see 11, she says, "I'm here now, I'm home." And like I said earlier, people, this is now our fourth mention of 11 possibly thinking that this is her home and that this is her house and that this is her mother. But then what do we see, people? Okay, we see this creepy side of Mama, which I have never fully understood, but we see this creepy side of Mama where she looks up right at 11. She goes, "No." And what else does she do, people? She is the one who does the hand grab this time, except she doesn't grab her hand. She traps her and grabs her damn arm, all right? And as Mama is doing this, okay, if you think logically, Mama just pulled her into her mindset, okay, as we see throughout this show. And if you want the most major example that we have ever seen in this show, okay, in season 3, when we see 11 trying to find Billy, okay, and we get the famous scene, okay, where Billy basically shows her his memory, but then all of a sudden as 11's coming back, she gets trapped into this mindset. And that, my friends and family, where does that happen? This happens at the cabin. So now we have another connection here, people. Because the first time we ever see 11 find Mama is where? In this cabin. But if you're really connecting this, how does Billy do that, okay? He kind of sits there in this mindset in the void, acting like he's not even there, all right? Kind of like we just saw Mama. And then all of a sudden 11 gets close enough, says something, except in the Billy scenario, 11's the one who grabs his hand. But in both of these scenarios, okay, what happens, people? Billy is infected by the Mind Flayer, more specifically, and he all of a sudden grabs her arm and pulls her into this mindset. Well, as we know, the Mind Flayer is out and about and infecting Will, alright, at this point in time, in this season, but then all of a sudden we see Mama do the same exact thing that we saw Billy do while infected. Which, if you really think about it, is extremely fucking odd why she would do this. And we kind of get proof that 11 kind of gets a flash and wakes up into a different mindset, not her own. And the reason being is because all of a sudden we see 11 close her eyes and then reopen her eyes, all right? And then what do we see, people? We see Mama running around behind her, kind of fucking with her. If you look at this like, oh, we're just getting pushed into a flashback, then your mindset is going in the wrong direction here, all right? Start looking at this like Mama was messing with 11 in this moment and trapping her into this memory for a specific reason. And I only have one answer to the reason why that could be a thing, okay? And it's gonna sound crazy, but let's just keep going. Because as this flashback goes on, okay, it starts off basically kind of showing us that Becky is the one that comes off lying about this, right? That's the first thing we see, and that's the other character involved in this scenario. So basically from the first time we saw Becky, we find out that Becky doesn't know anything. Becky just believes this all to be bullshit. So if Becky was there, now this looks like Becky's the liar. But Mama's the one showing 11 this, okay? And if you notice that this flashback, okay, kind of seems a little bit blurry, all right? Maybe that it's not 100% factual. And the reason I'm going to connect that is because when we see Billy's flashback where she gets sent back in, that looks like a movie, okay? Correct? When we see that flashback of Billy and his mom at the beach, okay, that is like a perfect movie-esque HG moment, okay, of a memory. And same that we see involving Max later in season 4 as well. It's basically very, very clear and not blurry. However, in this flashback, all right, it's a little bit blurry. So in my opinion, is this flashback not 100% factual coming from Mama to 11? And the reason being is that because Mama wants to make someone else look like the monster here. And more specifically, that being our boy, Papa, Dr. Brenner, people. Because as this whole show has entailed, people, we get this vibe that Dr. Brenner is this bad guy trying to trap these children and do experiments on this. However, we see multiple hints that Brenner does not really have as much power as we think. He more specifically is the scientist behind all of this shit and the one doing the experiments and investigating this in a scientific sense. But in season 1, we see that Connie lady, and there's a line that basically Brenner says, well, this is what you wanted, as if she's more in charge, right? And then we see Owens all of a sudden come into the picture when Brenner's not there, but we end up finding out later that Brenner is alive and that he still has involvement with all of this, except they're doing it in secret now in season 4. They're doing it in secret from who, people? From the US military, who they might have had involvement when this was all a thing in seasons 1 and 2, being Hawkins' lab specifically. But as we see this entail, we see that Mama has this problem, okay, that she was maybe in the process of having a miscarriage, okay? And then all of a sudden it jumps and it shows this Mama getting rushed to the hospital and they're putting the masks on her, alright, and she's kind of going in and out, and it shows us them slightly cut her open. And then what does it show us, people? It shows us that Brenner is the one that pulls this baby up, and then he hands it over, and then what? That's it. We see this face of Brenner like he is the bad guy. And then all of a sudden we start getting the story that Mama wakes up and Becky is also there, and then she doesn't believe it, that she heard the baby crying, and this is when we start to get the belief that these people took her child. So logically, people, now that we're getting this storyline, okay, we are getting the story from Mama and this flashback, okay, this blurry flashback. And as we know, this scene continues, it leads us to Mama finding these files from a mysterious, safe that does not happen to be there when we go to the real room later. But we see her as if she's finding these files, okay? So this kind of gives us a vibe that was Becky involved with this, okay? That's giving us Becky vibes that Becky is the sus one here. But as it continues, okay, she gets to Hawkins' lab and we see that green car, and if I'm going to connect anything at all, and I know it's not the same car, but it kind of looks like Joyce's car, who this woman met a year previous to. However, she did not see her car as far as we know, okay, so just keep that in mind. But as we see, okay, she goes into Hawkins' lab, she ends up killing the guard and shooting him, and then she goes into the room, sees Jane and Kali or whatever, or at least this child. And then we see her get pulled away and all of this bad shit happen to this woman and why she is the way she is. But you still might be a little bit confused as to why this is titled Mama is the Monster, and you might not be getting the hint, okay? But there's things that aren't factual in here, and we find this out close to the end of season 4, people, and I never really thought about it this way. So, what I want to do for a part 2 of this is talk more deeply about things that are more said, okay, involving, say, Becky, and things that could connect, and things that we find out later in the show. But there's one thing that gives us the major tell that something's not right with what Mama showed us all the way back in season 2. And like I said, I think there's a bigger picture as to why Mama, necessarily trapped of this memory into Eleven's mind. Or should I say incorporated this memory now into Eleven's mind, where Eleven now believes this to be the truth. Because, as we see in season 4, we see that the Nina Project is a huge thing, and what do they do, people? I've talked about it multiple times. They basically are showing her memories, okay, to try and get her to remember things slowly that she had forgotten. And basically, as that whole scene and scenario continues, okay, we get led up to the Massacre at Hawkins' Lab episode, okay? And what happens in that scenario, people, okay? Other than Nancy being put into a vision where we get kind of a side story or while this is happening, but we also get the story of this memory, of this conversation between Eleven and Henry Creel / number 1. And no, not Vecna yet, because he was not Vecna yet. But my point is that we got that whole scenario and that conversation, alright? But as that scene entails, and Eleven does not agree to follow Henry / number 1, okay? And he gets mad and she basically pushes him against the wall and then they start fighting. When logically, as we see him put Eleven up into the air and he's about to break her bones and all this shit, Eleven kind of has a reborn moment. And what I mean by a reborn moment is that we kind of see Eleven kind of just lose herself for a sec. As this happens, everything goes light, and then all of a sudden we kind of see this like she's being reborn, correct? And if we think about this, people, what does this connect to? Okay, this connects to Mama's flashback, all right? And in my opinion, this is the moment that kind of somewhat confirms that 11 is that baby, okay? That she is Terry Ives' daughter. And yes, I mean all the way up until this point that we might necessarily not have known for a fact that 11 was Jane, okay? And trust me, I still have thoughts that might not be factual, but as we see in this scene, okay, as 11's having this reborn moment, all right? We basically see this baby being born from the perspective of the baby now and not from Mama and what she showed us. And what we see, people, is we see 11, okay? This memory that she has, this is her memory now of this scenario. We are seeing the very earliest memory that 11 has in this moment of herself being born, which ends up giving her enough power to fight this evil, okay? So just think about that. But as 11 sees herself being reborn, we see glimpses of things, okay? We see this glimpse of Papa in the bottom of his face, so that lines up, all right, to Mama's. However, what doesn't line up is that all of a sudden we see Papa and he kind of hands the baby over to the nurses, right? But then, what do we see, people, okay? And this is where things are not factual to what Mama showed us. Because as we saw, right, the last thing Mama shows us before she ends up fully passing out, we see Brenner's face like he's the bad guy. However, in this, when we see 11's memory of her being born, she sees a little bit of Brenner, she sees those nurses, and then what happens, people? They turn her and they start handing her to her mother. And more specifically, we see Mama's face, we see Mama reaching for her, and we also see a thumb on Mama's hand like someone's rubbing her head, and that would be on the other side of this, so that is not Brenner. And then all of a sudden we see this, people, and we hear Mama say, "Jane, I love you." So, the biggest question is, people, is why is Mama showing 11 a bullshit flashback of even when she was being born and what happened? And like I said, people, that's the thing, is we might have been lied to or thrown off a big amount of this involving this character of Mama and also involving our character of Papa. Because even as we see in the Papa episode how that ends, 11 does not understand and she does not accept what that man did. And that is one of the last lines we ever hear from Papa, is that I need you to understand, 11. I need you to understand that I did this all for you. And even as viewers, people, in my opinion, when this happens, you grow sympathy for this man. For some reason, even after everything we have seen this man do, we grow sympathy. We feel bad for this man who tried to just carry this girl out, and he got gunned down by a sniper from a helicopter, people. And basically in his last dying breath, he's looking at this girl saying, "Please understand, everything I did was for you." So, like I said, people, there is a lot more to understand. But number one, okay, the vibe of Aunt Becky in my mindset has fully changed, and I hate to say it, but that Becky Ives theory could be true. But logically, if this one ends up being true or close to the truth, okay, my theory for Becky Ives would be debunked by my own theory, okay? So that's why I wanted to say that and include her in this whatsoever. However, okay, throughout this theory, we now have gotten the vibe, right, that Becky just does not believe in this bullshit and is in full disbelief up until when we see her with Hopper and Joyce. And like I said, even when she leaves, she basically tells them and apologizes that she was not any help. And that could be for a reason, is that because if she doesn't believe this to be true, she's not going to give them all of these facts. And more specifically, all of the information that she has in that office that we end up seeing her show 11, okay? And that's a whole nother conversation. Because like I said, people, as we see 11 here, all right? And as we see her like more of a member of this family in a sense, we see Aunt Becky including her and wanting to help her, and we see that 11 truly believes that this is her home. But then all of a sudden we get this weird vibe where we know in this show that when someone is in the void and spying, that weird shit happens with lights and leading you to somewhere. And as we have seen in this show specifically, okay, we see that number one in season 1, episode 3, okay, Holly Jolly, when Holly, who kind of somewhat looks like Jane to me, ends up getting led into Will Byers' upstairs room and almost attacked by a Demogorgon coming out of the wall because of what, people? She followed the lights. And then if you really want to connect this, okay, even more, okay, in season 4, when we see our group go to the Creel house trying to find the Vecna source, what do we see, people? We see the lights start blinking and they get led to this source, or whatever what you want to call it. So now that we have seen this happen in season 2, and if we really want to connect all of these things, anytime we see something like that happen, really has a connection directly to our girl mama. And as we have seen this, it does not have good scenarios when we see that happening. 1 with the Demogorgon, and 2 with Henry Creel / Vecna / number 1. And more specifically involving the Creel house, like we have connections to what Becky says, like I mentioned earlier. So no doubt in my mind there's some weird shit going on with mama, but no doubt in my mind that is proof that 11's memory of herself being born does not match up with what mama showed us in her flashback. That, no doubt in my mind, there's something wrong with that, and no doubt in my mind the reason she could have trapped this memory into her is so that 11 had this false memory this entire time. So that 11 was purposely seeing things wrong, okay, and that every time something, she was about to gain strength necessarily, or that she needed to, like, release this power in a sense where she needed to think of these things, every time we see her use these powers, most of the time is, oh, use a bad memory, use a bad memory. And what's that memory, people? It's of that, okay? So logically, if that is a fake memory and a bullshit memory that a mama put into her mindset, 11 logically has been gaining this power through a false memory. But now we see her in the Nina Project in season 4. We see her access her full power, which it was allowed her to put Henry Creel / number 1 into the Dimension X or wherever he went. We now see her capable of doing that, okay, in a flashback memory during the Nina Project, whatever. But we now see that she's capable of doing this because of what, people? That she got the truth, and she remembered the truth about her being born. The only thing about that is we have not seen that side of the story yet about this, what we just explained about why mama lied about that, and we haven't seen 11 realize that what she was shown was a lie. So, I know this was kind of a long one. I actually don't know how long this was, but like I said, there's some weird shit going on with Mom, and I know this was kind of hard to explain, so I hope I did it correctly. But I'm going to analyze this character a little more thoroughly, involving a lot of the times we see 11 have these flashes and when these things happen. But you also got to think that we have other characters involving Aunt Becky, who just doesn't believe in bullshit. But then we got Kali, okay, involving this flashback, which is very odd to me, and that's the thing I need to figure out still. However, if you really truly think about it, people, and you think about this as if Mama is the one bullshitting and feeding us lies, okay, she's the one who showed us Kali. So we end up knowing what Kali is out there doing. She's out there killing the bad men and making it seem like these are the villains, correct? So I have no idea the main connection or when Kali and Mama could have actually met, but there's got to be a bigger reason as to why Mama supposedly sent 11 to Kali. And as we know, people, maybe Kali could have been the one to maybe make this memory more of a realistic sense, or maybe more HD, as we kind of see in, like, involving Billy, like I said. But let me know your thoughts, people. I hope you guys like this one. It was a long and confusing one, and it sent us down another motherfucking rabbit hole. But Mama, in my opinion, is the biggest rabbit hole in the show, no doubt. However, no doubt in my mind, there's some weird shit going on with this character involving her and 11. And I don't understand that, but no doubt in my mind, there's bigger tells. And there's something involving, once again, the Creel family, that said. And the only hint I'm giving you, you could go and see if you notice it, but the only thing is it's during that conversation, like we just said, that led up to 11 finally remembering in the truth about how she was born. So let me know your thoughts. As I said, I hope you guys like this one. This was a big topic and a big title, but I hope you guys like this one. Keep subscribing, liking, following this journey, and you guys already know, we out.